is much better off. The country is more than twice as wealthy in real terms as it was in 1980. Per person, adjusted for inflation, the economy now puts out $1.70 for every dollar that it put out in 1980. Those are absolutely tremendous economic numbers. So how come we're not all really well off? Why is it 1 in 7 families has filed bankruptcy in the last 25 years? Why is it people are so mired in debt that television ads are just full of debt relief and take on more debt ads, sometimes at 99% interest? Why is it that so many people don't have health insurance and so many people no longer have a retirement plan? And by the way, the average income of the bottom 90% of Americans, what I call the vast majority, is smaller today than it was in 1980. And since the year 2000, when we really got serious about this tax cut business, the average income of Americans every year, 2001, 2, 3, 4, 5, has been smaller than it was in 2000. There have been some gains in 2004 and 5, but they haven't gotten up to equal 2000. And of those gains in the year 2000, it's either 5 over 4 or 4 over 3, half went to people who make over $1 million a year.
Didn't that wealth transfer massively begin, accelerate with Reagan?
Oh, yes. No, that's, sorry, that's exactly my point, Amy, is that what happened is that we put in place all sorts of new programs, and many of which were never written about in the news media, that got no attention whatsoever. We created healthcare billionaires while making healthcare unavailable to 1 in 7 Americans. We did this with government money. We allowed people to buy public assets for, in some cases, a fraction of a penny on the dollar, and then poured government money into them. And what, our national myth that Ronald Reagan ran for office on was that there were all these welfare queens driving Cadillacs out there. I think there was, in fact, one scam artist who went to prison. But what's really going on is welfare at the top, and way beyond what's been reported in the news media is corporate welfare. We have built into the scaffolding of the new economy rules that funnel money to the top. And that this has happened really shouldn't surprise us, because under our campaign finance system, which has gotten worse and worse and worse with campaign finance reform that hasn't worked, politicians running for high office spend a great deal of their time talking not to you and me and school teachers and police officers and firefighters and factory workers, but to rich people and their paid representatives, and they hear about their concerns and what they say they need to make things fair.
You also delve into this whole phenomena across America of the big box stores, the Targets and the Walmarts and the Kmarts, and obviously they at least offer cheaper goods, cheaper consumer goods. Your analysis of their impact?
Well, first of all, they say they offer cheaper goods. I don't accept that that's necessarily true. But here's what happens, and this is a good example where the news media hasn't done a good job. I have tons of news clips that say, oh, this new shopping mall is coming, or a new Walmart, or a new Cabela's store, and thanks to tax increment financing, this store is going to be built. Well, what the heck is tax increment financing? I'll tell you what it is. You go to the store with your goods, you pay for it at Walmart, and there's a very good chance that that store has made a deal with the government that the sales taxes you are required to pay, that government requires you to pay, never go to the government. Instead, those sales taxes are kept by Walmart and used to pay the cost of the store. And typically in those deals, the store is tax exempt, just like a church. Now, there are two ways that it's important to think about this. One is, that means your kids' schools, your police department, your library, your parks are not getting that money. And you'll notice we keep saying we're starved for money. We're twice as wealthy as we were in 1980, but we've got to close hospitals and we've got to close schools, and we don't have money for all sorts of things like after-school programs, even though we're twice as wealthy. The second thing to think about is, imagine that you owned Amy Goodman's or Juan's department store across the street. You suddenly have to compete with people whom the government is giving a huge leg up on. You think you would go broke after a while? Well, in fact, you will. And I tell about a man named Jim Weeknecht, who owned a little store in the Poconos of Pennsylvania. He sold fishing tackle, hunting gear, stuff like that. And the way he made his living in his little tiny store, enough that he was able to have his wife stay at home and raise their 3 kids full time, was by charging less than a company called Cabela's. Well, then Cabela's came to town. This little city of 4,000 people made a deal to give Cabela's $36 million to build a store. That's more than the city budget for that town for 10 years. It's $8,000 for every man, woman, and child in that town to have this store. And even though he charged lower prices, he was pretty quickly run out of business. That's not market capitalism, which is what Ronald Reagan said he was going to bring us. He said, you know, government's the problem, we need markets as a solution. Well, that's not the market. That's corporate socialism. And what we've gotten is corporate socialism for the politically connected rich, not all the rich, the politically connected rich, and market capitalism for everybody else.
And of course, many of those folks need lobbyists to be able to get these kinds of breaks from the government. And you talk about the explosion of lobbyists and their influence on government.
There are twice as many registered lobbyists in Washington today as there were in 1980. If the lobbying community had grown in revenues since the 70s at the same rate as the economy, there would be 1/10 as many lobbyists in Washington. And those people are not there doing the good of the public. You know, the Constitution,
they're not just in Washington.
Talks about
right, they're not just in Washington.
No,
they're also
they're
at
in
the
all
state levels. Yeah.
They're in all the state capitals. They're in city halls. They're all over the country. The lobbying business is one of the fastest growing businesses in America because, you know why? It's easier to mine gold from the government's treasury than from the side of a mountain. Why wouldn't you go do that if you could get the government to give you money? And Donald Trump, a tax that's supposed to serve the poor, his company got $89 million for a tax designated for the poor. Somehow, Mr. Trump's public image suggests to me that he does not think of himself as a poor person.
David Cay Johnston will leave it there. Free Lunch is his book, How the Wealthiest Americans Enrich Themselves at Government Expense and Stick You with the Bill. Speaking to us from the PBS station WXXI in Rochester, New York. That does it for the broadcast. Democracy Now! Produced by Mike Berkshire, Federico Du, Sarah Mate, Angelique Comet. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. Thanks for joining us for another edition of Democracy Now!